Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I know it's been a little while since I've posted, but today we have another minisode. I have some stories that were submitted to me from email from some listeners, and some that were submitted to me to share from Reddit. So thank you to everyone that submitted your stories, and keep them coming. I want to hear all of them, all the creepy stories, all the creepy experiences. Send them my way. So without further ado, here we go. The first story I have tonight is titled The Hat Man Story. When I was a child, these things visited me twice. The Hooded Little Guys. In some of my earliest memories, this would have been in the Los Angeles area back in the late 70s, I saw them at the foot of my bed. They could control my dreams. They tried to relax me through dreams by making images and sounds that they thought would entertain me. But it was horrifying. Even as a toddler, I knew these guys were up to something. I must have been about 3 years old, but in my family, we all remembered me being horrified at the tickle monster. They would poke at me while I was in bed, causing me to run down the hallway to my parents' room. I recall more than one of them, short, silhouetted beings, dark with darker eyes, and bony, prodding fingers. To me, they looked like Jawas from Star Wars. The big hat, cloak guy. The second memory I have is more striking. My family had recently moved to the Seattle area. I was about 5 or 6. My family slept on the floor one of the first nights in our new place because we didn't have furniture yet. Me, my mom, my dad, my little brother. I awoke from my sleep for some inexplainable reason, and I was somehow drawn to look towards the door, which was now cracked open. Something was not right about it, and I stared at the crack in the door. I closed my eyes and started falling back asleep when I quickly woke up again to notice that the door had been moved. Just a little, but noticeable. Suddenly, I could see a silhouette of somebody there. This was not the relatively cute little tickle monster I knew already. To me, the guy looked like Zorro or the Penguin from Batman, complete with hat and cloak. I can't recall its face, but I believe it may have been pale, but I can't be sure. It was playing this game with me at first. I would only move closer when my eyes closed. Once I reopened my eyes, it was closer. I did not dare move or make a sound to awaken my father because even at that young age, I did not want my father to confront this thing. Finally, it came up to me, knelt down to me, moved my blanket, produced a little cloth sack from the inside of his cloak, and sprinkled dirt on the bag, from the bag to my genital area. That was it. Then he got up and walked out. I believe he walked out backwards facing me, but I can't be sure. Then here are some notes about the story. One thing that I know is that these things exist and they can touch people. These memories were hidden in plain sight at the back of my mind until I was in my mid-20s. At a funeral for our friend's father, I met one of their aunts from Mexico, an elderly lady, who proceeded to tell us why my friend's dad spoke with this stutter that we all knew about. It happened in the late 1940s, I suppose. This was in a small town in Mexico somewhere. What she proceeded to describe to me was very similar to what I saw. My friend's dad saw the same thing, and he fainted from fear. When he came to, he stuttered for the rest of his life. The story resonated with me, and so I started telling my story, and I tried to keep up on the topic since it seems to happen so much. Unfortunately, I see a lot of posts and comments about this phenomenon that just sound a bit like wishful thinking. I just know when I hear somebody experiencing the real thing. Even if sleep paralysis is the catalyst for this experience, it does nothing to explain the experience itself. I am not an atheist, but I do not believe these things are evil or demonic. We cannot comprehend what they are yet. Who knows what is good or evil to them? Who knows what they even are? I think interdimensional or alien. Crazy story. I especially hate the hooded little guys with the bony fingers and the darker than dark eyes. Something about short creatures. I don't know what it is. It's terrifying to me. I hate it. I hate all of it. The Hat Man story as well. I mean, it sounds typical. It's just the same as everything. He seems to always be in the doorway. Not always, but most of the stories I've read, he seems to stare at you from the doorway. This one was a little different just because he sprinkled dirt on him, which is also very strange. This is crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. The second one I have is from a user on Reddit that gave me permission to post their story, and it's it is labeled The Baker Boy. When my mother was a little girl, she spent her early years in a remote area of Mexico. No electricity, no running water, and definitely no air conditioning. Due to so many people all living in one small house, it wasn't uncommon for her and a few other of her siblings to sleep on the porch. Yes, you heard that right. They slept on pallets outside. She recalls it was actually much cooler some nights on the porch than it was in the house. The porch had a screen that my grandfather installed, and he also built their house by his own hand. The closest neighbor was miles away, so from my understanding, the house is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now this is where the story begins. The ghost story begins. My mom and 3 of her siblings were the lucky ones who got to sleep outside every night. They never had any problems or fears until the night the Baker Boy came around. A small child with golden curls dressed in white baking attire, wearing a mask that was a real skinned pig. He would walk in circles around the house reciting a certain phrase that my mom never really understood. It wasn't in Spanish or English. At first they were scared, but over time they grew to appreciate his presence. It was almost as if he were walking around the house to protect them from whatever fate had maybe happened to him. They never knew who he was or if he was even real, just that they would see him. My grandpa never believed them and assumed they were making it all up and told them to come inside the house, but they swore they weren't. It wasn't until over time an outline of his past began to show up around the house. Needless to say, they didn't stay in the house much longer and moved before they eventually made it into the States. The strangest part is that before my grandpa died, he told my mom he had finally seen him, the blonde boy with the pig mask. Ew. I'm not sure what in the hell that could possibly be, but again, small childlike looking creature with baking attire and a pig mask. I mean, I don't know what that could possibly mean. I'm sure there's some sort of weird, there's got to be some sort of weird meaning behind that. The next one is actually a recorded story, and this one is from a fellow podcaster. His name is Andy, and he is from Spooky Island Radio podcast. And here it goes.
So my name's Andy, and my story revolves around when I was moving from the southeast of England to the northwest when I was about 12. So basically my dad got a better job up north, so we had to move. It sort of all comes back into the main story. But basically me and my older sister had to move up north where my nan and granddad lived, where my mum and dad were looking to buy a house. And we lived with them for a while so we can get into the schools and stuff like that. And after a few months of living with my nan and granddad, my mum and dad came up north and they'd found a house. But the weird thing was they never took us to see it. And we didn't see it until the night that we moved in. Like literally, keys handed over and they drove us there to sleep there for the first time. And that was the first time me and my sister had ever seen it. And when I asked my dad about this, he said that the house was owned by this really old man and woman who basically hated kids, never had any of their own kids and hated all the neighbourhood kids. So they couldn't know that my mum and dad had kids, otherwise they wouldn't have sold them the house. I mean, what absolute fucking helmets, but like, each to their own. And yeah, so for a few years we lived in the house and nothing really happened. Until there was basically the first thing that happened was I picked up the post and there was a card in it addressed to somebody. I didn't recognise the name, so as any 12-year-old does, I just fucking opened it. And basically it was addressed to the woman who used to live in the house, and it was a condolence card. So basically her husband had died, and obviously they hadn't told everybody the change of address. So I was like, okay, so he's dead. Okay. Didn't think much of it until one Saturday. I must have been about 14 at this point. Everybody in the house was out. It was the middle of the day, so lots of light, and I was just stood up, playing my bass, just sort of moving my head left to right, rocking out just a little bit. And out the corner of my eye, like as I moved my head back towards my bedroom, I could have sworn that basically I saw a shadow of a man stood on the stairs. And it wasn't like a full form, but it was like a shadow, and it sort of moved towards the stairs. The stairs sort of turned around and went underneath themselves. And it was like that vivid that I stopped the music, put my bass down, and I started calling out for my parents, thought they'd come home, thought it was like maybe my dad. And no, there was nobody in, and I walked down the stairs and nobody was there. And my parents came back about 10 minutes later. I said, have you just come back now? And they said, yeah. But I said, I think I just seen a shadow in the house. And my dad just like laughed it off because, what dad wouldn't? But me and my mum used to watch Most Haunted all the time. So she was sort of like, oh, maybe it could be something. But, sort of just said, just your imagination was running wild. So that's the first part of the story. And then basically after I'd seen the shadow, I was having this really vivid dream, but it was like I was awake also at the same time. So it's really difficult to explain, but I was having a conversation with this dark shadow, and the dark shadow was just on the other side of my door. And it was like the scene of a movie. It was like, I would ask him a question, and then it would cut to like a close-up of this guy's face on the other side of my door, but it was like it was like a shadow. And there was this to and forth, going backwards and forwards, asking each other things. And it got to a point where I shouted in my dream, oh, I don't believe you exist. I don't believe it was you that I saw. Show me that it's you. And then it was like I was the ghost, or I was the shadow person. So the door opened and I was basically watching myself sleep in bed. And like I ran towards myself, or the ghost ran towards me, and I basically woke up in cold shivers, and all my hair stood up over my body, and I was just like, what the actual fuck was that? Like, it was actually terrifying at the time, but it was so real. I mean, having spoken to mediums over time when I've done investigations and stuff, they said, well, it sounds like maybe you were astral projecting or having some sort of lucid dream. But yeah, so that's the main thing that happened. But after that, like, I was never scared in the house. I remember having my friends over while my parents were away, and one of my mates was like, oh, can I go to bed? And I was like, well, yeah, of course you can, like, just go whenever. So he went to bed, and then me and my other mates were sat down in the living room, and I was stood up against the door, and the door is where the stairs basically backs onto the stairs, which goes obviously up to the first floor. And I remember my mate going to me, like talking to me, and he went, oh, has Martin just gone upstairs? And I was like, no, he's been in bed for about 45 minutes. And he was like, no, he's just gone. I've just seen a shadow go past you and go up the stairs. And I was just like, well, it's obviously not him, because I'm stood at the back of the, like, with my back to the steps, and I'd know if he came down, it wasn't him. But then I thought to myself, no, it's just the ghost. And like, I didn't feel scared at all. I just thought, hey, this is something that I live with. And really, after that night, I never had a bad feeling about this ghost or the shadow being that was in my home. I just thought, well, he's my pal, he's my ghost, so if you see him, you see him. But it was almost like after that dream that I had, I don't know, something changed. I don't know whether, obviously, if it is a shadow being or like a ghost, whether, like, my theory is that I stood up to him and so he didn't scare me anymore, or like if ghosts can feel things like respect for somebody, or he basically knew he wasn't going to be able to scare me, and he had some sort of newfound respect for me for standing up to him. And we just lived in harmony, really. I've seen him a few times after that, and like I say, my friends, some of my friends had seen the shadow as well. But yeah, that's my main story, so hope you'd liked it, and I look forward to hearing what you think about it. So, bye guys.
Okay. That one also gave me the chills listening to it. Being so young and seeing that and being brave like that, I just don't think I would react that way. Even now as an adult in my 30s, I feel that I would be crying hysterically if that happened to me. And obviously the shadow people, seeing the shadow, I mean, that's just the Hat Man. Along the same lines, creepy as hell. But thank you, Andy, for sharing that story with us. Check his podcast out as well. The next one I have is a little longer. This one is also from a Reddit user that gave me permission to use their story. This one is titled Simultaneous Experience. Around the year 2000, I was living in Hollister, California with my dad, his dog, and mostly outdoor cats in a somewhat rural area in the neighborhood where each residence was on a 5-acre lot. After moving back from living in Knoxville, Tennessee with my mom, stepdad, and half-sister. I don't recall having a prior paranormal experience and haven't had any remarkable experiences since. A very close friend of my mom and dad's during college, whom they still remain close to and talk with often, Bob, was very much into researching paranormal phenomena from people's experiences and also historical references. He was fascinated especially by my great-great-grandmother, Mary Hayes Chenoweth, and her documented abilities, especially in a book by Louisa Johnson Clay in 1914 titled The Spirit Dominant, A Life of Mary Hayes Chenoweth. During my 2-year period living with my dad again, Bob used to visit us often from Los Angeles, where he had moved to college after to work on the Merv Griffin show as producer, and would seek out some interesting guests involved in the supernatural in various capacities from time to time. Bob would describe amazing events and uncanny moments of how things intertwined amongst these guests and his personal life. I wish I could recall these spectacular stories, but that's for another time. Anyway, Bob would drive up to LA every 2 to 4 weeks and stay with my dad and I for a few days, and this went on until my dad met and married my stepmom in 2001. She ultimately moved into the house later that year. She had 2 adult children and her son Kyle was 19, the same age as me at the time. He would stay at the house often for days at a time, and we got along really well. There were 3 bedrooms, but they were all occupied, my dad's, mine, and my other half-sister from my dad's previous marriage, but she was only there on occasion and was 12 years younger than me. I was working 2 part-time jobs and preparing to move back to my mom's to resume university in late 2003 in Ithaca, New York. Kyle and I would each have our significant others and friends over on occasion, as our parents would travel frequently and we were of the age where we'd party into the wee hours of the morning on occasion. Kyle was staying overnight several times a week, and we had grown relatively close over the last couple years. I don't recall specifically what day or month, for that matter, my experience occurred, but it was nighttime, around midnight, and it was just Kyle and I in the house as our parents were out of town again. We hadn't had anyone else over that day or night and just had a lazy day at home. We were both heading to bed. Kyle slept on a camping mat and used a sleeping bag to sleep on the carpeted floor of the dining room on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms. It was a typical quiet night, in the sparsely populated neighborhood, aside from the wondrous sounds of nighttime nature, mostly insects. I do recall this was not the rainy season, because then the frogs' nighttime chorus would have muffled all the other sounds during dusk to dawn. The neighborhood and part of the town where we lived was also very obscured from light pollution, fortunately, and thus quite dark. I closed my door, as I had always done for as long as I can remember, and was getting tired, so I switched off the light on my nightstand beside my bed and proceeded to go to sleep on my back, with my hands partially overlapping on my chest. Not too much time had passed, perhaps maybe 20 minutes or so, while attempting to drift off to sleep. For whatever reason, I suddenly heard very loud, deep breaths. I still had my eyes closed and wasn't asleep, and recall a childhood fear I had at one point regarding hearing breathing while in bed at night and thinking it's your own, and subsequently holding your breath to discover the breathing sounds are still audible. This is exactly what occurred at this moment when I had heard these slow, deep, rhythmic breaths, which sounded to me what I would imagine a man's heavy breathing to sound like. I remember thinking I must be dreaming or imagining the sound and being fearful of opening my eyes and seeing something dreadful. So instead, I decided to hold my breath, hoping that it was my own breathing sounding strangely for some reason. Unfortunately, the heavy breathing continued while I held my breath, and I was frighteningly shocked at what I was experiencing. Perhaps only 20 seconds had elapsed, but it scared me enough to bravely open my eyes and peek about the darkness for unknown shapes. Fortunately, there was nothing there, so I twitched my bedside lamp on and looked around my room and under the bed and in the closet and was relieved. So I again attempt to go back to sleep and dismiss the incident as my mind playing tricks on me or something. As I lay there again in the same position as before, on my back with hands resting on my chest, I begin drifting off to sleep again. But not much longer, again, something more frightening happens. I feel this immense pressure on my chest, and fingers begin being forcefully curled inwards towards my palm, in the shape of a fist, and I'm having difficulty breathing due to this weight on top of me. This didn't happen for too long, but after the frightful breathing occurrence, and then this, I jumped out of bed and ran out of the room and decided to go to the living room to watch TV on the couch with the lights on. Earlier that night, I had seen Kyle go to his bed in the dining room, and all of the lights were off in the house when I made my way to bed not too long ago, perhaps 30 minutes earlier. As I approached the living room, which is also on the same end of the house as the dining room, I'm surprised to see Kyle on the couch with the TV on. I say, "Hey," and he says, "Hey." And I said I was having trouble sleeping, and he said the same thing. So I take a seat in the recliner chair, and we're watching TV, which I don't recall, but I do know it was not something scary. A few minutes into us being there, we were both eerily quiet, and I was still in shock as to what I had just experienced, and I mentioned something vague about having a really weird experience, and Kyle agrees, and literally begins to tell me the exact same thing that had just happened to me only minutes before. I ask Kyle, "Are you fucking with me? Because this isn't funny." He looks at me confused, and we're both obviously agitated and frightened, and I explained that what he had just described happened exactly the same to me. We both sat silently in disbelief and deduced that this seemed to happen simultaneously to each other due to the timing of us both being in the living room, as he said he wasn't out there very much sooner than I was. Still shaken by what just had occurred, we decided to watch something funny, though I don't recall if we found something on TV or chose a movie, but put the scary situation behind us and hope it would never happen again. As the hours passed, Kyle moved to the carpeted floor in the front of the coffee table, so I decided to move to the couch as we were both getting tired. Perhaps an hour or two later, we both awakened violently, breathlessly, and forcefully simultaneously from our positions of lying down to sitting up, gasping for breath and shaking our bodies as if to shake off the now familiar feeling of being compressed by a massive weight on our chests. The awakening of us was loudly audible, and we were both fearfully looking around, dazed and confused. Again, we both experienced the same weight and forceful, involuntary clenching of our hands into fists. Ultimately, we proceed to calm down and are just like, what the fuck is going on? We made a small chit-chat, and Kyle tells me that one of his friends, Rocco, who had been at our house numerous times when we had parties. Rocco is a very big dude, tall and linebacker body, and doesn't scare easily, according to Kyle, which is totally believable considering his size. He says that one night it was just him and Rocco hanging out at our house, and they were outside at nighttime, just chilling and walking around the house. Went inside to use the bathroom and was gone for several minutes. Rocco thought he heard breathing very close to him and thought it was Kyle messing with him, so he turned around and quickly realized nothing was around him. This happened a few times to Rocco while Kyle was inside. So Rocco decided to go inside after that and didn't want to go back outside. Anyway, this was one of my one and only experiences that it was helpful for my remaining sanity to have experienced it with another person who was able to validate it without any influence of the details. If anything, Kyle could have thought I was messing with him, but he never said that and could tell by my demeanor that I wasn't fabricating nor embellishing my occurrence, especially after the incident together, in the same room, at the exact same time. I mentioned Bob at the beginning to provide context of my life at the time, and also to insinuate that I wasn't closed-minded to possibilities of the unknown. I don't want to ever have an experience like that again and remind myself of it from time to time so I don't forget. I've also told it verbally in relevant encounters over my life and will continue to do so whenever appropriate, and hopefully will encourage others to not easily dismiss their own experiences as simply their imaginations or dreams or whatever excuse they deem necessary to pander to the skeptics. Wow, that was a long one, but also a good one. I mean, to me at first, it kind of sounded like sleep paralysis because laying on your back, that kind of tends to happen more with the weight on your chest, not being able to breathe. But, the more the story goes on, you realize that it happens to his stepbrother at the exact same time. I mean, it could be sleep paralysis, but then they both experienced it again I don't know. That's crazy. And then their friend experienced it. So to me, it sounds like there might be an entity, a spirit, or something messing with them, especially since their friend heard the loud breathing and wasn't sleeping or getting ready to go to sleep. So that one was creepy. Again, thank you so much for submitting these. I think I have one more small one that I'm going to read. This one is also from a Reddit user that gave me permission to tell their story. It says, "Hi, I'm Jenny, and first I want to apologize for spelling and punctuation that may be wrong. I'm horrible with grammar." Same. I have a few stories, but here is just one. I was a teenager in 7th grade, probably around 13. My cousin Crystal was age 11. We were in my bedroom visiting for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I'm not aware of any background in the house, but I'm assuming not much because it was a duplex on the Navy base in Point Mugu, California, near Ventura or Oxnard. As I sat up on my bed, on my day bed, and she was on the trindle. For those of you who don't know, it's just a little pop-up bed that fits under the day bed. Across from the room, the old stereo system my father and I just gave me when he got his new one, and instructed me that under no circumstances did I need to have the volume above. The volume above, I believe he said 7. And not wanting to disrespect him and not wanting to have the stereo taken away from me, vigilant about not having it loud. Music was on, but it was barely even audible because we were just talking eerily about having possibly seen a shadow figure type thing in my backyard, when suddenly out of the blue, the stereo began blasting at its highest volume while scanning stereo stations. And I have to say, this is an old stereo. I'm 43 years old, you do the math. It was old then, it had an 8-track on it, and there was no auto-tune button, only manual dials. So the fact that it was scanning channels was really freaky, not to mention the fact that the volume was now blaring. And my cousin and I looked at each other and then immediately ran out of the room and into the family room where the rest of the gathering was going on, of course. We were dismissed and told to take care of the noise and just stop being ridiculous. I unplugged the stereo and never used it again. We only lived at that house for 1 year total. That's the life of the Navy brat. But I did see things out of the corner of my eye constantly, especially in the backyard, and often in the hallway, but never more than a glance out of the corner of my eye, which always made me question if I'd seen anything at all. Creepy, especially since they were talking about it, and then all their electronics started to get all funky. Very creepy. Thanks for sharing that. There was one more small one, and now this one isn't a paranormal one. This is just straight up creepy. So this one is from another Reddit user that approved me to share the story. It says, okay, Grandma was a hardworking single mom in the early 70s. She had a very, very small house and mostly lawn furniture for regular furniture. For a series of months, most of her furniture would move a little to the left, inches to the left, just enough to bruise yourself. She would wonder, move it, and then go back with her life. This abruptly stopped one day, and a week later, she gets a letter in the mailbox that says, "Now you can see how close I can get to you." And it never happened again. Ugh, that is terrifying. I mean, that kind of reminds me of the ghosts in the attic, like living in your attic and they mess with your stuff while you're gone. So thank you for everyone sharing those stories. Keep them coming. Some of them were emailed to me, so send me a message, email them to me. I'll have all the information where you can send the stories in the show notes. So thanks for listening. Hope I creeped you out a little bit, and have a good night. Thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. As always, we love to hear from you, so please send us your listener stories to ycmopod@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at ycmopod, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can do some fun stuff over there eventually. If you like what you hear, pretty please give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends. If you have episode suggestions or just want to be a guest on our show, also let us know. And last but not least, you can now support the podcast by going to anchor.fm/Maria-Jordan/support. Thank you all again, and talk to you soon.